Happy Saturday, everyone. Hello, hello. Welcome to Asked and Answered. I can't believe we're already on our second one. It's so good. Thanks for all the great feedback and comments on the first Asked and Answered segment. I thought it was really good. It's just a nice opportunity to connect with you guys, get together and talk about products. And today we are talking about distress embossing glaze. So hello to everyone. Hey, Stacy, I see Stacy was here. Ranger's here. Ted, whoo, everyone's going quick now. Hi, Louisa. Hi, Diane. Hi, Robin. How's everyone on this Saturday? Hello, Mario. He's over there. I love all the little behind the scenes work he does. It's like as soon as we go, I can just see all those movements. And as long as he does those, I know things are going really well. That's right. Hello, Frank. How are you? Hey, Jana. So yeah, it's good fun. I'm so pleased that you guys like this concept because it's not for everyone. You know, some people just want to kind of see cool makes and things, and that's also going to happen in the future on different videos that I do. I've got an Easter one in the works. I don't know when that's going to be yet, but I love hey Zoe, how are you? I love the idea of just being able to focus on product and answer the questions that you guys hopefully have about that. Hey P, how are you? Hey Julie. So yes, if this is your first Asked and Answered, it's basically just kind of a question and answer kind of thing. I'll be answering questions. Some of it will be conversational like this, and some might require a demo to explain. I have some things set up just to talk about because I think it is important that I talk about the most frequently asked questions that we get about a product. But of course, this is also your opportunity that if you're watching us live and you're in the chat, you can post questions that we can answer during the live. We will do our best, I will say, to answer. Just please make sure, of course, as we go through on these Asked and Answered that you ask questions pertaining to the topic of the day. So this isn't just kind of, I might do a free-for-all Asked and Answered someday, but I think it's also important to focus on a specific topic because it's just easier for everyone, I think, to follow along, especially me, okay? So yeah, today is all about distress embossing glaze. Here he comes. Here he comes. There he is.
Happy Saturday.
Hello.
Nice to see everyone.
It's great. Nice to see you.
Oh, wow. Thank you.
Hey, Roseanne. Hey, Janet. Hey, Joanne.
Joanne.
Yeah, it's going to be fun. Oh, glazes, see, so you don't understand them. Because that's the thing. You know, the topics won't always be Ranger. They won't always be about distressed products and inks. There's a lot of things. I always chat to this guy. I'm like, I need to talk about this. He goes, start a list.
That's right.
Start a list
and
just pick one. Just pick a random topic.
But
so
the easiest way is the questions we get. We just
yeah.
write them down, and when there's so many of the same questions,
exactly.
That's what you need
I think
to
that's what it's all about. So
all right, get with
okay,
it.
it's going to be
Get
good.
on,
Hello,
going.
Millie. Hello, Barb. Okay, let's get started with our Asked and Answered on distress embossing glaze. I'm going to switch over
Have fun, you guys.
just to kind of talk about it first, and then we'll watch the chat. Mario will help me out as well. So distress embossing glaze, I think the important thing is just to understand what it is. Now, I can tell you that because this is a Q&A format type of live, if you want to see really in-depth videos and learn a lot more, believe it or not, there are embossing glaze videos. I think they go back to, gosh, they go at least 5 years, I think back to 2020. So Mario can post a link in the chat that goes directly to timholtz.com, and I think there's already like 3 or 4 posts just on distress embossing glaze. So thanks, Mario. So even after the live that you want to take a little deeper dive, that might be good. So currently, you're seeing the whole collection of distress embossing glaze. There are 48 of the 72 distress colors in embossing glaze. Will Ranger do more? It's hard to say. If people like them and people buy them and people use them, then that's always good for me to get them to do more colors. I would love to see them in more colors. I would love to see the full palette because with all of you, I have full set syndrome. But I keep mine in distress embossing glaze tins. So these are tins that also fit, you've seen me use them for a lot of other things. They fit crayons. They fit these storage jars because these storage jars are also sold separately. So you can fill them with glitter and embellishments and all sorts of different things. But this is how the glaze comes. It's in an aluminum topped jar. Now, some people, if you swatch them, you can obviously store them this way, right? So you can have all the lids up. This tin works either way. These jars will fit in there, so if you want to swatch, but I love the fact that if I do it this way, I don't necessarily have to swatch. I can see the colors. And I just kind of have mine sorted in a palette order. But understanding glaze, I'll just do some quick, and then of course we'll watch the chat just to see that as well. I see in the chat too, you all have full set syndrome. That's just who we are. if you like a palette and you like the colors, you want everything in everything. Okay, so let me just take a jar. I'll just pick up a jar. I'll just take this red because it's the one that was kind of sticking up out of the tin anyway. Okay, so what is distress embossing glaze and how is it different than embossing powder? Well, the first thing to understand is that it is embossing powder, okay? It's called a glaze because it is translucent. Now, that doesn't mean that it's the only translucent embossing powder in the industry. That is not true at all. A lot of companies make translucent powders, but the glaze line are all translucent. And that's where things start to differ because typically there are colors in certain product ranges that might be opaque or might be translucent. And honestly, the only way to tell is if the company shares that information or if you have it and swatch it yourself, okay? Because these are other Ranger embossing powders. These embossing powders all happen to be opaque, and I'll talk about translucent and opaque. But if you just look at the jars themselves, they look very similar. I mean, obviously it's a different color, but powder-wise, it's not like you can see through this jar and you can't see through this jar. When people go, well, how do I know if mine is opaque or translucent? Well, if it's a distress embossing glaze, it's definitely translucent. If it's another type of embossing powder, just swatch it. What I mean by swatching it is melt it on a surface because the look and feel, and I'll talk about that, the look and feel of what that is distinctly different. These are swatches I made when glaze first came out because to me, I think it tells the best story. I put it on a grungy background, obviously an inky background. And this one has just some embossing ink, and we'll get into the different inks on the surface and different colors of distress embossing glaze. And what you can see is that these colors, besides that they are amazing distress colors, they are translucent. So even though they're embossed, we can still see all those inky splotches underneath it, okay? These are standard or traditional embossing powders that are opaque. So you can see when you emboss them, you cannot see through them. Now, you might want, and so there's not like a right or wrong, because there's oftentimes that you'll want an opaque embossing powder for certain things, and then there's times that you're going to want something translucent because of a technique or something like that that you might see or use. And hopefully this Asked and Answered will give you ideas of like, well, why would I want a translucent embossing powder? I don't know, I only use it for sentiments. Well, if that's all you're doing, then you may never need one. Or if you see some ideas here, you might be convinced of like, okay, I need them. So color-wise, as far as my swatches, I just kind of do swatch sticks, if you will. I cut strips of cardstock. I've seen a lot of different people do different types of swatches. Maybe you're going to stamp. Maybe you just want to, do a little smudge of something. That's all these are. This is just taking the embossing ink dabber and swiping it on. Because when it comes to applying the glaze, we're going to get into different things that you can use to apply them. So for my swatches, just for a visual for me, I did white cardstock. Now we'll talk about cardstock as well if there are specific questions. Then I also did craft, and the reason is because we're talking about a translucent product. I want to be able to see what it looks like on a darker surface. It doesn't necessarily mean I'll use craft. It might be something inked, but it is nice to see how a tone or a color can change, like picked raspberry. Really bright and vibrant when it's a white source coming through because it's translucent. But I also love this deep pink, almost magenta when it's on a darker surface. So even if you're doing something maybe a little vintage or maybe you have a different colored cardstock, it is kind of cool that when you're working with this, you can kind of pick and choose how you want your colors to appear based on your surface color. And again, it doesn't have to just be cardstock, okay? So that's how I swatch all of my colors. And I just printed labels for the back just so I know, because some of the colors, like even Twisted Citron, super bright and almost neon, but on a dark color, it's a really nice limey green that still shows up even though it's translucent. Lighter colors, well, it's not going to be as intense as brighter colors, but that is really the case in anything translucent, like bundled sage. Well, if you gave me this and said, what color is this? I'd just have to guess because it kind of just looks brown because there's not so much pigment in here. It definitely has a little green tone, but I wouldn't be able to say, oh, that's bundled sage versus shabby. Well, I do know it's not shabby chitters because we don't have that one yet. But, that's the point about swatching is you'll get a better visual, okay? So let's talk about, I'm still watching the thing. Most of you guys are talking about swatches and sets, which is hilarious. understanding embossing in general. Okay, the principles of embossing are quite basic, okay? What you need is moisture applied to the surface, powder, and embossing powder. All embossing powders it's ground up plastic, okay? It is ground up. There's different types of grinds based on different types of products, different brands, different companies. There is not like an industry standard across the board. Distress embossing glaze is quite fine. I would say it's on the fine end, so it's a little finer than traditional embossing powder, but it's not as fine as, say, a fine detail embossing powder. That stuff is almost like fingerprint dust. So it is a finer grind than something like just a regular embossing powder, but there's also chunky embossing powders. There's ultra thick embossing powder, and that's not the plastic being any thicker. It's just the granules are chunkier, so when it melts, it actually spreads out to a thicker coverage, if you will. Now, when I talked about moisture, typically we talk about embossing inks when we're embossing, okay? And embossing inks could be embossing, let's see, can you talk about embossing on vellum? Sure, I can do that. Embossing ink is a glycerin ink. It's very kind of greasy, kind of oily. And the reason people prefer this type of ink when embossing is it has the longest open time, meaning the ink stays wet longer to get powder on, tap it off, do all that stuff, and heat it. That ink, there's a variety of different brands for this. Embossing ink, Versamark, it's very similar. Versamark's a little stickier, and it comes in different delivery systems. There's ink pads, there's re-inkers. This is an embossing dabber. Now, when I say it's glycerin, it means it's really thick. Think of it like a hand soap that's kind of a slow-moving thing. So if you have an embossing dabber and you're going to be embossing, just put it upside down so that sludge can kind of work its way to the top, and then it will come out of that fabric dabber easier. If you just take it off the shelf and it's this way and you expect it to be fluid, it isn't fluid like that. It just has that slower move because it's glycerin. And then there's also embossing pens. These are great because you can do spot coloring, you can do your own handwriting, you can do all sorts of different things when it comes to creating with embossing ink. So, question, if you mix opaque and translucent powder, can you make a marble effect? Absolutely, because this will remain translucent and this will remain opaque. So you can melt them, swirl them together with a wire or anything like that. Absolutely, you can do that. People have said their embossing powder's gone bad. How can ground plastic go bad? Good question, Joanne. I'm not sure. I don't know what gone bad necessarily means. I've never experienced embossing powder going bad. I do know that because it's a powder, depending on where you live and how you store it, if it's in a high humid area, it could clump together, but you should be able to shake it up and dry it out. But as far as embossing powder not working anymore, I don't understand that. I really don't. I think a lot of that has to do with paper. So when people are having, I have my dabber off to the side just so you know why I took it off camera. If people are having trouble with embossing powder, when they say not working, does that mean not melting? Does that mean not being as dimensional? Let's talk about that real quick. Let's talk about the different types of paper, because anytime I talk about stuff, it's always going to be about paper. Mario, could you do me a favor? In that top drawer, there's a file folder that would just say Vellum. Could you grab me a sheet? Because someone asked about Vellum in that one. Thank you. Because I typically don't work on Vellum, but I do have it, so I can show you. So we'll talk about paper. So these are just 4 different paper types. I'm not saying it's the only paper you can use to emboss with, okay? That's not it at all. Let's see, what do we got here? Okay, got a piece of vellum. Thanks, Mario. Perfect. So this is Distress White Heavy Stock, which is a smooth 130 pound. This is watercolor cardstock, so we've got a texture and a smooth. That's something, this is 114. This is mixed media heavy stock, very similar to what's in Dylusion's journal, or perhaps a tag. So it's just kind of that creamy color. And of course, this is craft heavy stock. And what you need to understand is that all papers are different. So even though I'm showing you 4, you may have a craft paper, but if it's not this craft, it's not going to work like this craft. Or you might have a white cardstock, but if it's not this white, it won't work the same as this. It might work better. So my advice to you is if you have specific paper lines that you work with, try it. Because this is what I'm going to show you as far as how embossing glaze in particular works, because that's what we're here to talk about. We're here to talk about embossing glaze, okay? How you work with embossing glaze is very interesting, okay? You have some options, and I'm just going to talk about inks to start out with. This is white heavy stock, which is smooth. This is embossing ink. Okay, so believe it or not, I did stamp in embossing ink. I just didn't do anything with it. Let it dry and it pretty much disappears. This is stamped in embossing ink and embossed with embossing glaze. And the color I use just for the swatch, I'll just grab it just so we're kind of talking about the same thing. We'll get red off of there. Let's do this right. Mario's kind of keeping track of these questions because I want to finish this train of thought and then I'll get into the question. We'll talk about these products right here. There we go. This is how I created my swatch. I used a stamp. Just took this little clover from Curiosity Shop. I thought it was just a great sample because what you need to understand is also the type of stamp you use. There's so many variables when you have success with a product, you know, be that ink, embossing powder, anything. Okay, so all four of these swatches were done the same way, 3 ways. Stamp with embossing ink, embossed with embossing glaze. So this first one was stamped with distress embossing ink. I used peeled paint, embossing glaze, and embossed it. So if I don't emboss it, the clear ink is not visible. If I emboss it, that's what you get, okay? The next one is stamped in distress ink. Now it could be a matching color, it could be a different color. That's why I encourage you to watch the other videos because they're way more thorough about this, okay? So distress ink, stamped alone, distress ink with glaze. And when I say glaze, you can see when the light hits it that it is in fact shiny, okay? Distress oxide, stamped, left alone, distress oxide with glaze. So you can see right away just from the same color of glaze, because it's translucent, the 3 different types of ink I stamped also change the color, change the tone, which is really cool. The thing to also understand though is that when you just use embossing ink, and I'm going to try to hold this as close as I can without blurring out. When you use embossing powders at all, even glaze, you're getting kind of how do I say it, like a goopy kind of embossed design. And that's why I chose this detailed shamrock, because if it was just a solid image, you would not notice this. There would be no difference. If I stamped a solid heart, it would emboss just like everything else. But when it comes to detail, embossing ink is actually my least favorite ink to ever use if my stamp has detail, because it's thicker, it's glycerin, so it's going to attract more powder, and therefore my fine lines become, well, gloopy, just they become thicker. So you can see the detail, the difference, especially in these little lines when I stamp with distress ink. You see a lot more of that detail because the ink that is holding the powder isn't goopy, it's a dye ink. Now, my open time is much shorter. So I could take, I don't know, a minute or so before I get powder on here. I'm not sure why you would wait a minute before you stamped and put powder. Here you pretty much have to stamp it and immediately apply the powder, but it does adhere just the same. It doesn't adhere any more or any less, but because the ink is not goopy, it doesn't hold on as much powder. And I would say oxide, very similar results to distress ink because of its delivery system. But the difference, because oxide has dye and pigment, it actually is a bit brighter because the pigment in this ink is really creating a different foundation, and you'll notice that more on craft. Okay, so this is white heavy stock. It's very smooth. Watercolor, you would think would be great, but I'm going to hold both of these just so you can see the difference. My watercolor cardstock, because it's designed to be more porous, it's designed to absorb more, my embossed image is much more blurry than it was here. My images, they stamped and embossed nice, but not nearly as crisp or detailed as this. It doesn't make this bad at all, but even looking at the ink and how the ink transferred, it's the same color ink. You see how my peeled paint was much more defined and intense on a smooth paper than it is on watercolor. Just because when I stamped it, it was the same, but because watercolor is so porous, it pulls in that color into the paper. So your ink is not as intense. So see, even stamping, you think, oh, I only stamp on watercolor paper. Well, okay, but then your colors aren't going to be really as intense as if you have a smooth cardstock. And smooth doesn't mean smooth to the touch. This has a smooth coating on it, this paper, and that's what's keeping all of my color on the surface, okay? So that's really important. I'm confused. You can use regular ink to emboss? Yes, you can. I thought you had to use pigment or oxide. Absolutely not. You can use any type of moisture. You can emboss with water, which I can show you. Any kind of moisture. It's just your open time. So yes, most people say embossing ink or pigment because those have the longest open time, but you can really emboss with just about any dye ink, as long as you're quick. And some inks and papers, they absorb way too fast. And so if it doesn't work, well, then you can't emboss with that ink. So you can't say, oh, you said any kind of ink, but there's so many factors that you really have to try to find the right paper and the right ink that works for you no matter what, okay? So just in the two, white paper is very different. Then we get into mixed media, also a coated paper, but now it's cream. It's not bright white. You can see it's a different creamy. So now we're even getting totally different colors from the glaze, even though it's clear ink and the same color glaze. Well, the reason this is a different color is because it is translucent. That's what makes working with glaze so stinking fun, is because you always get different color variations depending on your background. And I love that about a product, that it's the same color, but I get so many different options depending on my choices, be that paper, background, inks, what color I stamp with. And then same rules, like when you see it with Distress Ink and Oxide, the detail is really great, very similar, because we're talking about coated paper. Now craft is a whole different animal, especially with something translucent. And I chose peeled paint because I don't want to cheat and do something really bright and like turquoise or pink where it's going to show up no matter. I did something that had a similar look to the background. But you can still see that the ink that was used can definitely impact it. This is one where you actually see the embossing ink more because it's glycerin based, and anytime you get any kind of grease or even fingerprints on craft, they never go away. So not surprising that my ink is still visible. When I do the green, I would say it's the darkest. It's probably pretty brown because it's dark green through brown. But when I add a little bit of Distress ink, so stamped in peeled paint, it's a bit greener. But I would say the brightest green, no surprise, would be oxide, because when you stamp an oxide on craft paper, that pigment is really showing up. So just these swatches, I hope, are really helpful for you to kind of visualize and remember, if you're not getting the results or effects with a glaze that you want, play around, try different inks, try different papers, try all of those things, okay? So I think that's really important to remember. So I'm going to get back to the vellum one real quick, and then I'll keep looking for other questions. Embossing on vellum, the thing about vellum is it does have a bit of a tooth. This is a paper that is translucent, but it has tooth, meaning it actually has a texture to it, even though you can't see it or feel it. So often when you emboss on this, it's finicky. It's got a crazy static charge. I'm not one for anti-static pads, but I do know they work. So if you have an anti-static tool because of basically where you live or humid, I definitely recommend a tool like that. I live in the mountains of Arizona, so it's pretty dry here and I don't have to worry about it, okay? But vellum, it just wants to hold on to a charge. So let's just do a simple stamping thing. Well, let's just do the same clover. I mean, I have other stamps, but then I can kind of compare vellum to the other. All right, so I'm just going to take a stamp. We'll do this, and let's work with an ink, shall we? Yes, let's take Distress ink. All right, just going to ink this up. Tap, tap, tap. Perfect. Just going to stamp. Just stamp with purpose. Easy. Take your glaze, apply it to the paper. I'm just going to pick this up. I just put enough on, and then I tap it off. And I usually just use the bottom of the jar just to do a little tappity tap. Any excess you can just take off. I'm not a flicker. I don't think you should be a flicker when you emboss, because you do flick off a lot of embossing powder. So don't be a flicker. Just do a little tap. You know, sometimes if you have, you know, a big background that you don't care and you want some of the powder off, then yes, you can flick. There are techniques often where we flick off some of the embossing. But this one, you know, if I flick, all that powder that's there is going to come off. You're not going to have as much powder. And that could also be an issue of why people think their embossing powder isn't working, because they're flicking half of it off. That powder has to sit on the surface in order to melt. Okay, so embossing. You can emboss with different types of tools, and I'll get into that. I'm just going to use an embossing gun to start, and I'll talk about Ranger's heat tool. I'm just going to heat this up, so I'm just pointing it to my hand just to make sure that I feel some heat. I'm going to hold it off the surface because heat passes through paper much faster than if heat was on your table. On your table, you're going to get your paper to kind of look like lasagna. It doesn't take long. This is already melted. We're done, okay? So that is Embossing Glaze on Vellum. It heats really quick if you heat up the tool and if you remember to allow the heat to pass through the paper. Not just vellum, any kind of paper. Because if I have my paper down here and I'm heating it, what's going to happen is I got to heat up this entire surface before it starts to heat, and my paper will start to curl up on the edges. You'll see on this, when I hold up this vellum, that now the edge of this vellum is all buckled and starts to turn up, even on cardstock, because heat rises. So if you're embossing cardstock on a table, all the edges of your card are going to start curling up like a chip because the heat is trying to escape. And that's why if you hold it up, you can heat through it. And if you have sensitive fingers or you're heating up, you can use this little handle tool, right? The little silicone mitts, and you can emboss that way. But it does help if the heat can pass through it. That makes it so much easier. Okay, so just try that. Just try not flicking it. But as far as this rubbing off or chipping off, like, it's adhered, okay? The problem also might be using too much ink. Embossing ink is glycerin. So if you have a lot of glycerin ink in between the powder and the paper, it could impact it scratching off. That's why I said I just don't really use a lot of embossing ink for stamps. And depending on the surface, that could also change. And we'll talk about different things we can use besides inks in that. So let's just see. I'm just trying to look at the chat. Look at that. I don't know, it's hard. Did you see anything, Mario, that I need to circle back on?
I didn't see anything.
Okay. If you guys have any questions, it's really, because kind of once I'm in it, I don't want to stop mid-thought and get to a question. So if I miss your question, feel free to just ask it again if I can. It might be, yeah, too much ink. I mean, really, especially when it comes to this ink. People just don't understand, like, how goopy this stuff could be. It's great when you want it to be great, but it can also just be kind of slimy. Okay. So really knowing what your preferences are when it comes to embossing is key. And this is what I love about glaze. I love the fact that I can have some different colors worked into a layer, whether this is a journal, whether this is a card, whether this is anything. Can you double emboss with the embossing glaze? If double emboss means can you heat it and add more powder and heat it again? Yes, you can. The thing that I would suggest if you're going to double emboss is that I would really like to know, distress inks are water-based. Yes, they are water-based. Could you emboss on Yupo? Yes. Anything that's heat stable. Yupo is synthetic, it's plastic, so you can emboss on it. You just need to be sure that you're not overheating it because the Yupo will ripple. But yes, you can emboss. You could even emboss with things like archival ink. Is embossing glaze the same as embossing powder? Joanne, we covered that right at the opening, but I'll review that real quick again for people that are joining us. Embossing glaze is translucent. Embossing powders, most are opaque, but it is an embossing powder. So yes, to answer your question, they are the same, but all embossing glaze are translucent, and typical embossing powders, not all, are opaque. What do you clean your stamp with to get embossing inks off? I just use water. Because even though it's kind of glycerin, it's still water-based. So it's not oil in there. So even though it feels slimy, again, like glycerin soap, what do you wash soap off your hands with? Water. So you can clean embossing ink off of your stamps with just water. Totally fine. Okay. Can I show the dabber and how it works? Sure. Let's do that. Okay. Let's take something like, I'm looking here at some glaze. You know what? I'm just going to get some colors out first, but yes, that's what I'm going to go back to. I'm going to use the dabber next, but I just want to take out just some different colors. I won't take all of them out, although I'd like to, but I'm not going to for now. Just want to have some different colors so I don't have to keep going back to these tins. That's good, that's good, that's good. There's so many great colors. You can't be deceived by like what you see in the jar. Like this one, for example, Mermaid Lagoon. Like when you see the powder, you're like, what is that? That's not the Mermaid Lagoon I know. But then when you see it, like, yeah, it is. That's just like the ink. So it's pretty cool. Swatching on this one is probably more important than any other product. All right, let's take this, some frayed burlap. Oh my gosh, there's so many good ones. I won't use them all. I never do, but hey, we have them. Just in case, right? Just in case we need to. All right, Mario, can I hand these to you? Sure. Just in case I need a color? Thank you. Mm-hmm. I have too much stuff I brought out on the table. Not surprised, guys. Shocker. Okay. So the question was about just seeing a dabber used, and maybe even like when to use a dabber. I'm telling you, I use a dabber a lot. No problem, Joanne. It's really important to just understand like different tools for different things, like even pens. Every product, believe it or not, should have a purpose. It really should. Even though you may not think that it does, I think that it does. So let's talk about something flat, like DieCuts. Okay, I have a bunch of stuff in here. Even some embossed backgrounds. I'll do one of these too. That's already embossed. I've just die cut some things out of white. And by I mean Mario. Mario's great help. He's like, you need any help? I'm like, yeah, can you help me with this? Okay, so let's just say you had some die cuts that you wanted to emboss. And they could be anything. They could already be inked. They could be patterned paper. They could do whatever. Can I please emboss on black embossed paper? These don't work well on black because they're translucent. So I don't use black with embossing glaze. But craft will do craft. That will be dark. So on something like a die cut, the cool thing about glaze is that if you had a plain die cut, this is just, again, white heavy stock, you could stamp on these. So here these I stamped with archival ink because I want something permanent if I'm going to do this. So you can use any kind of permanent ink if you're going to do your stamping, especially if you're going to use a dabber. So I stamped on these just to give them a little pattern. And what's nice about the glaze, of course, is that you have that beautiful shine and you can see your image. So you could use one color of glaze. You can mix your colors of glaze. You can do like an ombre effect with different colors of glaze or your inks. I mean, there's so many different things. And some people go, well, hello, Captain Obvious. Why can't I just use ink and use clear powder? You could. It won't look like this. It would just be shiny and it would be visibly, and if you look at some of the older videos, you'd see that comparison as well. But the ink would be under the surface and you have a clear top. This is actually, the whole color is shiny. So that's why I prefer glaze. But it doesn't mean you can't do it if you don't have glaze. So we'll do a bird and we'll do a little feather. And then we'll even probably do this one too. So what I'm going to do when I go to emboss it, again, your embossing dabber, you just want to have it kind of upside down, just to kind of get the sludge in there. The color that we'll do for our bird, let's see a color. Let's do Salvage Patina. Salvage Patina is a little bit more teal or bluer than this one. That'll be nice. Or we can do something, we could do cream. Oh, I'm going to do that. Okay. Here are some tips for whatever it's worth. First, give yourself a workspace. I'm moving these out of the way. Okay, perfect. You always want to have a piece of scrap paper. Some people like to use cardstock. Some people like to use a little tray with a funnel. Whatever works for you, you do you, okay? If I'm going to emboss, I just kind of like to have my things ready. Do you have to have the jar open? No, but I just do because I want to get things going, okay? When I go to emboss a die cut, there are different tools. Some people like to use tweezers for this. If you want to use tweezers, you can, but if you plan on embossing the whole thing, here's what I do. I just take these. It's just a pad of inexpensive Post-its. I'm just going to take a Post-it. For this bird, I'm just going to take my scissor. I'm just going to cut that because I really just need a strip. I don't need the whole thing. Okay, totally up to you. Then I'm going to take my die cut and I'm just going to stick it onto the post part. Take the dabber. Now the dabber, you have to dab it to get it going. Kind of give it a little pressure while you're pushing down, but don't squeeze it to death, just a little pressure. And then there's ink. Like once it's cloudy on the glass, I know there's ink. And then you just drag it across. So could you take your ink pad and smush it on here? Of course you could. But I love that the dabber, you don't have to be heavy-handed. You don't need a lot of this ink. It's very, very, you'll see it. It's very wet. It's very kind of greasy, and that's plenty of ink. Then I'm just going to take my glaze. I'm going to pour it over the whole thing now. Is it going to stick to where the Post-it is? Yep, who cares? Is it going to stick to where the little bit of excess ink was? Yeah, who cares? Who cares? It's going to come off. All right, so who cares? So once that's done, I'm just going to put my powder back in, close it up, and now I have kind of a tool to really do exactly what I said I was going to do. Now, I like to use a heat tool. Can you use Ranger's Heat It tool to emboss? Yes. The difference is this, how the heat is distributed. These are both the same temperature, okay? Sometimes paint strippers or heat tools are a little hotter, but these are the same temp. This is designed to focus heat, you can see. This is designed to diffuse heat. What's great about this tool is for inks and mixed media, it allows you to dry things without blistering them. This really focuses the heat. So when you're drying ink or paint, you almost like get it bubbly because of an embossing gun. Is there a need for both tools? Without a doubt, okay? So if I want to do emboss with this, it's just going to take longer because it's heating up more space. If I use my embossing gun, I know it's going to focus right in that center point, and that's what I can focus on, okay? So I'm just going to pick up that paper, and I don't need to hold it in the air. I just need to hold it off the table, and you'll see that that Post-it is perfect for holding that on. I'm just moving the heat tool in a small circular motion. I'm not freaking out hair drying. And you'll see, like, it's already melted. See that? It does not take long when you hold it off the table. Now, the longer you heat glaze, the smoother it's going to get. Some people want to heat from the bottom. You can absolutely do that. But the thing about embossing powder is that, see how smooth it is? It has just a tiny, maybe it might have like a little bumpity bit. But if you heat emboss and it looks really bumpy, my guess is, especially on something solid like this, it's not quite embossed, okay? Do I use the high setting? I guess, yes, I use the 2, but I've used the 1. It's whichever way my thumb flips. But yeah, in this case, it was the 2. But you can see that embossing glaze, it has a little tiny bit of an orange peel, but not visibly bumpy. If you kind of see visible bumps of your embossing, my guess is that you didn't heat it quite enough. Is it melted? Yes, but remember, it's plastic, so the longer you heat it, the more liquefied it becomes, which is the next step. If you do a stamped image, especially with any kind of embossing powder, and you overheat it, like you heat it, you see that it turns shiny, but you want to make extra sure that it's shiny. So you heat it for a couple more minutes, and then all of a sudden it's gone, and you're like, what happened to it? Again, maybe someone thinks their embossing powder went bad. It's because this becomes liquid. So if liquid is going to absorb into the surface you embossed on, embossing powder would be no different. So the longer you heat embossing powder on paper, it can come up to the surface, and then it could start absorbing into the surface because you have liquefied it, okay? So that's important. And yeah, it just comes right up. There's no adhesive on it. It's just a Post-it. Makes it super easy. So that's a great way that you can do like any kind of design if you want. So let's play around with this feather. Let's do some different colors, because we can talk about that when it comes to working on this. I'll just take this other half. It's a bit bigger, so on this one, I would probably, like if the die cut is bigger, well, just use more of your sticky. So I'm just going to put, this way I've got like the whole feather stuck down. Just makes it easier than trying to fight with it. Just kind of be wise about it. All right, let's take some colors. And so just so we can play with a little bit of mixing, I'll do this is some frayed burlap. I think we have this is crackling campfire. That will be nice. And powder is powdery. I mean, I'll talk about cleaning up because I use a Swiffer for this. These colors are nice. Maybe I'll use just a touch of, let's do a touch of yellow. Ooh, mustard seed, that's going to be nice. Okay. Here we go. So same thing, going to go back to the dabber. Could you use an ink pad? Yes. Okay. We'll talk about that. What if you don't like the shine? That's great. I'll bring that in right now. I've got no agenda, so remember that one, Mario. Shine. Sure. As soon as I emboss this, I'll show you the shine. Okay. So notice I'm not like squeezing and doing that. It's a dabber. Just dab. Because you don't need a lot of ink. I want a very light coverage of ink, but I want it everywhere. Okay. There you go. Can you refill the embossing pens? No. Once the embossing pens go dry, it's time to get another set. Okay, so what I'm going to do for this is I'm going to pick up colors. You have options. You can use a little spoon if you want to just sprinkle some colors. So I can take like a tiny little spoon and I can just tap that just to get some colors. Or you can take your fingers and go in there and pinch it, which I've done before. But sometimes like salvage patina, these will never reach that unless I tip the jar. So a little spoon is also good, and I'm just tapping the end just to get some color. This happens to be from Ideology Silverware. It has a little fork, little knife, and the cutest little spoons ever that are perfect for embossing or glitter or really anything. So just use what you have. And this is just allowing me to control the color and also put a lot of it back. So I'm just, again, tapping side to side, just getting some color where I think I want it. This is going to be frayed burlap, so this is going to be mostly the brown. And then if you decide you want a little bit more of a color, just go back. But you don't have to put just like mountains of color. You don't. You just want to sprinkle it around, because here's what we've got. So if you see it right now, it's just kind of little, I'll just say piles. So how we're going to get it to move around is just gently tap the bottom, not flicking, tap, little tap dance. And that's just going to kind of create a little vibration. You can see the powders already, just see how they get into a little pile of muck. We don't have to worry about that because the ink has already grabbed on to the powder. And that's kind of our mixture. Okay, if you miss a spot, so like over here, I still see a little bit of white. You can take some of the party mix, or you can take a little bit of your glaze. And some people don't like to do this because they're like, oh, but I'm wasting my powder. You know what? You know what's wasting? Not using it. That's wasting it. So this little party mix, some people like to save it. I don't in the glaze because these are translucent. So that would be like taking these colors of ink and mixing them all together. You're going to get sludge. So I just don't. I don't save this. I just throw it away. But if you want to save it for something else, you do it. Okay, so now I'm just going to put lids on, and you can move them out of the way. You don't, listen, if you're in like the glaze zone, go for it. Don't think you have to go in and, you know, always put the lids on because it's going to blow off like, you know, a giant windstorm. That's not going to happen. You can just move them out of your way. But if you have embossing powder on your glass mat, a couple of things. Swiffer is just, that's the easiest thing. You can use that, or you can use a microfiber cloth. If you find one that you can tolerate, this one I actually can tolerate, because I don't know,
I think I
don't know what it is.
You don't like the new ones. After I wash them, you know, 20 times or whatever, they're not so grabby.
Yeah, because it's still good, but it doesn't grab onto my skin like new ones.
New ones is the one you...
Yeah, I don't like the new ones then. That are really clingy.
Yeah.
Oof. Okay, here we go. Let's heat emboss. Yeah, I guess I'm always going on 2, probably because I'm in a hurry all the time. All right. So same thing, holding it off the surface a bit. I mean, you can see, I'll try to hold it up to the camera a little closer. See how quick it embosses? See, it's already shiny. And then you just start moving around. Once it goes, everything's ready to go. Okay, this I'm going to do just a quick pass just to try to show you something, what I was talking about earlier. Okay. See how that's still really bumpy right there? I'm just going to do one more pass over there to like smooth it out. And that's what's just going to give me a better, in my opinion, a better glazed look. All right. Because again, with glaze, it's translucent. The longer you heat it, also the more fluid it becomes and the more liquefied, and it kind of moves around, which is really cool. All right. So now I just peel it off of that and look what we've got. Isn't that beautiful? We can still go in and ink it, add crayon, we can sand it, we can do all the additional distressing, but my color foundation not only is shiny, but it's got great texture and just some beautiful color. So if you like more, if you don't like just the dumps, let's just say you like more of the powdery, then your fingers are going to be a better tool to get that little speckly, fleckly look. But, you know, again, I'm going to be doing I'd grunge it and crayon, and then it would completely take your eye away from any spot. But yeah, and then the Post-it note, like, I don't reuse them. I suppose you could if you wanted to until it didn't work, but you know, I don't want to risk the thing of that piece blowing away. Okay, what if you don't like it shiny? Okay, good question. Some people hate shiny embossing powder. Easy trick, but the best visual is actually something that I'm going to share at Easter when I do the Easter Live, but I've shared it every year, so it's not like it's not new. But here's what's cool. So I do this for Easter because I love the look of chocolate on things, okay? So this is using paint as my base, and my color is embossing glaze. Okay, so I've done this little swatch to talk about the base color. So this one is gathered twigs as a base color. This is walnut stain as a base color, and I use vintage photo glaze. So that's those two colors of, I'll just say chocolate. This gathered twigs, walnut stain as a base color, and walnut stain glaze. So you can decide like milk chocolate all the way up to extra dark chocolate, or kind of right in between. So mine is like gathered twigs and a little bit of stain. So I'm not going to demo the rabbit because I'll do that during the Easter Live. But essentially it starts out with paint. Then I'll use collage medium, which I'll talk about on some metals because we can emboss on metal. And then we emboss it. So this is what it looks like when you put embossing glaze over paint. So this started with gathered twigs, and I use walnut stain glaze because my little swatch told me this was the chocolate I wanted for Easter. But like Valentine's Day, maybe I want to have a mixed box of chocolates. So it's really good to have it. But notice this isn't super shiny, because here's the trick. After something's embossed, it does become very shiny. Get yourself some steel wool. 0000 is the number, 4 zeros of steel wool. That's what I use. You could try other ones. And all you have to do is apply steel wool over the glaze and it will remove the shine. Same thing with embossing powder. If you stamped a sentiment and embossed it and you don't want the shine, a little steel wool. I don't like the touch of steel wool. It absolutely freaks my freak. So I just put put on some gloves, and then I take a piece of steel wool, peel it off, kind of tuck it under like a little bun, and stick it to the Velcro of an ink tool. And now I've got a little steel wool tool, okay? But if you can handle steel wool, you don't need to put it on a tool, okay? That's just gross to me. If I steel wool this, I'll just do this section just so you can kind of see. And then I'm going to wipe it off, because you need to wipe it off. You can see already how it's dulled it down compared to the rest of the shine, okay? Now, for a rabbit, I wouldn't normally use a tool. I would have gloves so I can really get into all of those little pieces, okay? But on a flat surface, this is, because it starts out really nice, and you can see, yeah, it does. Someone said it looks like a toupee. But on a flat surface like a card or something, see, then I can go right over my sentiment much easier because it's flat. And then you just dust it off. So you can see it takes away that shine, where here it left the shine. But here I did steel wool, because I didn't steel wool the whole thing, just so you could see the difference, right? So like these little rabbits in a basket, they're chocolatey. They look really great. I can open the Easter basket just to show you, because, well, who doesn't want to open an Easter basket? But take a look at this yummy little chocolate rabbit. And I think I shared this, was this last year? I think so. I think we shared them last year. But see, look at that bunny. Perfect chocolate yum. And that's exactly what this one will eventually look like. So that's my tip if you want to get rid of the shine of any kind of embossing powder, is that. What about sanding pads? If you want to sand your glaze, it would look like you sanded your glaze. So if you want it's all scratchy like sand, go for it. But this is to just remove the shine and not actually scratch off the powder. So you could do it, but it's going to give you a very grungy vintage look, and it would not take it would take away more than the shine. How about that? That's good. Okay. Perfect. How are we doing, Mario? Doing good? I'm watching the chat. Does Ranger make replacement dabbers? No, they do not. If you're concerned, Joyce, then don't use it that way. If you're concerned about that, dab it out, or just get a re-inker for the stamp pad and apply it with a brush or a piece of foam. The thing about this is it's not meant for rough surfaces, how people tend to use this fabric dabber, pretty aggressive, but on something smooth like cardstock or whatever, you don't have to worry about it. But even if the fabric went, it would still dab. You would just probably use a paintbrush or, a blending foam or something like that. You could have a dedicated blending tool for your ink, and you could just use a re-inker, squeeze some out, take a blending tool, and apply it that way. Then you don't have to worry about the dabber. So there you go. Let's see. I do. I just saw Simon said, aren't these salvage rabbits adorable? Well, listen, because you guys are here, I'll tell you, because I'm going to mention it in the next live. These did not come back this year in the world of ideology. So whatever stock is out at your retailers for the tiny eggs and salvage rabbits, it's gone for good. So, and I know there's stock out there, so don't freak your freak thinking it's gone now, but they did not come back. I think they came for like 3 years, but this year, yeah, they didn't. But I know retailers have it. So if you're looking to do rabbits and eggs, my suggestion, probably get them now in March instead of waiting until April when you can't find them anywhere. But yeah, I stocked up for sure because, it is what it is. I do love that. Let's see. I saw a question and then I got a little distracted. But I see questions that aren't related to the topic. So I'm really sticking to glaze, guys. When cutting alphabets, do you recommend glazing paper before or after? It's just like what I did here. I prefer to do my die cutting first and glaze later. I don't like to die cut glaze things because you're die cutting plastic. So sometimes you're going to be successful and you're not going to have any problems. But typically when you do it, your embossing glaze will crack off or chip because this isn't meant to be embossed. I mean, or die cut through a die cut machine. So I always cut first, emboss later. All right. Can you emboss on shrink paper? You can, but shrink plastic is just, it's kind of finicky. You're going to want to put, you know, an ink that's going to work. I wouldn't use glycerin ink. I would emboss with a permanent ink like archival or something, but you could do that. Okay, let's see. How to use the pen. Okay, that's a good one. That's a quick one too. The pen is used for any time you want to use a pen. So it's the same ink that's in this, and it's the same ink that's in this. Okay, so we know this is great for stamping. This is great for backgrounds and die cuts. So when do you want to use a pen? Well, if you have great handwriting, go for it. You can use a pen and do all of your handwriting. But if you have things like paper dolls and you want to tint with glaze, they're perfect for that. So you can see that these dolls have been tinted with glaze. So like this lady, her dress has tinted. So there's no ink. The color is all done from the glaze, and it also gives like a really great shine. But now we know if we didn't want the shine, steel wool and it wouldn't shine. Or if you wanted, you know, the top to not be shiny, you could just steel wool that. But this guy did a little weathered wood on his suit. See, it's nice because I didn't emboss his hands. They don't have to be blue, or his kerchief, or right here. I did a little hat ring. And for this little girl, I just glazed the flowers that she's holding. So that's a really nice thing for the pen. Easy to do. Let's take a paper doll. Now keep in mind, we're dealing with things that are translucent. So if you choose someone like this versus someone like this, the color is going to be completely different on what you do. It doesn't mean that it won't show up. That's why you would go back to your swatches and go, which glaze shows up good on dark? Well, we already know picked raspberry does. Perfect. But what if I wanted it to be, I don't know, tattered rose or saltwater taffy? Well, chances are it's not going to be a bright looking pink. It's going to be kind of dingy. So that's the other really important thing. So let's do her, right? Simple. Because I don't want to do something where because it's all the same. You know, when it comes to glaze, it's the same. You put the ink down, you put the powder down, you apply the heat. Simple. But other things to keep in mind while we're on the subject, anything. So look at your photos, whether they're photo booth or photomatic, or whether it's pieces of ephemera. You can use the pen to highlight or glaze any of your element pieces, right? That to me is really, it's simple. So think about like the things that you have. Okay, where did she go? Here she is. Oh, he's out here too. He's hanging out. Okay. So for her, because I'm just going to glaze, you could use the Post-it note thing if you want to, but for her, because I'm not going to do her head, that's going to be kind of the handle. So that's why I'm not putting on a Post-it note now. Now the pens, you have a brush or a bullet. Bullet is going to be more for not only writing, but also filling in. Sometimes if you emboss something and you miss like a little part of an image, this is great to just go in and after you heat emboss, fill this in, apply more powder, and then kind of fix any little slight mistakes. If you're applying it to a surface, I just use the brush because it's just kind of a brush nib marker. So let's see, what color do we want her to be? That's pretty dark. I want to find something super light. Do I have it? Hey, Mario.
Hey, Tim.
Can you grab me the tin with the purple? Let's do, or because I think it has tumbled glass in it. The ones that got blues, yeah, thank you. That's going to be light. Or speckled egg would be really pretty as well. Because same thing, it just depends on, you know, what look do you want. Maybe we do some speckled egg. That'll be nice. That's a light blue. Thanks, Mario.
Sure.
Okay, so all I'm going to do is just going to take the pen and I'm just going to start coloring. Now, the pen is clear. So how do you know where you have it? Well, if you hold it up to the light while you're doing it, see that real shiny shine? I know that the whole thing is glossy, but it's definitely, the camera doesn't really show it, but I can see that ink clear as day when I hold it up. So when I'm coloring with an embossing pen, especially on something white like this, I just use my studio light. The other thing to know when you're using your embossing pen, it doesn't like to go over itself. So that means once you do an area, just kind of move on. Don't go back and color the same area. It'll just start to get pretty tacky and kind of grab on to whatever it is you're trying to color. It's not going to ruin it. It's just something that's, if you feel it kind of get a little tacky, it's going to be weird. Okay. So I don't know if you guys can see that, but I can tell that there's ink everywhere. I'm going to just kind of double check my work. I think it's pretty good. Not too bad. Okay. Put the cap on. Piece of paper. Yes, we'll get to texture paste. Sherry asks, can you emboss on texture paste? Yes, let's do that next. Okay. Let's do some glaze. I'm just going to pour it on. Do a little tap, tap. Okay, so see there's a couple of spots that I missed. I would go in and do that afterwards if I wanted to fix them, which I wouldn't. But if I needed to fix that, I wouldn't go in with a pen now, because anywhere you touch, it's going to want to attract everything. But you could, if you're really steady-handed and you're like, I mean, I'll just do it just because it's a demo. But if you were really steady-handed and you're like, okay, I'm just going to add a little bit of pen here. Even if you see how I picked up some of it, you can just wipe it off on your hands. It's not too bad. So you can kind of fix that. But you want to take that powder off of the pen nib. It doesn't stick like glue. And then you can reapply to like fill in the blanks. Right? Okay, it's still all going to melt fine. But that's why I don't ever worry about the blemishes, because I'm always going to ink and do all that other stuff. Okay, let's put this powder back.
And the pens are not made to be filled. Right?
They are not fillable. No, someone already asked that. They're not a fillable pen. It's just an embossing pen, and when it goes, it goes. But you'd have to use it a heck of a lot for it to go. Okay, heat this up. I'm just going to hold on to her head and just start embossing. Same thing. So you can use, a clothespin, little grippers, whatever you want. Okay, already embossed and shiny. Then I'm just going to flip. So now I'm going to hold her feet to do the top, because I don't want to ever bring the heat gun close to my hand. If you're holding something and you're embossing, don't ever move the embossing gun towards you. It's just going to get hotter. So there we go. There's our glaze. So again, this is something that I would add to. Simple. I would add ink, or I would add crayon. I would do other things. Even to these, I would just do it. But my foundation is really nice because it's a glaze color. And the glaze is going to act as a resist. So anything you put on, you don't have to worry about it kind of covering everything up. You do not need to prime the pens. You just need to take the lid off and off you go. You're ready to go. Okay. So we talked about that. We talked about glaze. Let's see. What was the other question? Oh, texture. There we go. Gosh, keeping this up. Okay. I want to get to this one too. That's a cool idea. Move this out of the way. Die cuts. Because I'll talk about some other textures. So let's talk about texture. The question was, can you emboss with textures? And the answer is absolutely, because just like at the very beginning, you can emboss anything with moisture. Do your paste have moisture? Yes. Glossy accents? Yes. Glue? Yes. Glue stick? Yes. Tape? Technically, yes. Anything that's going to grab onto the powder long enough for you to heat, you can use. So in things like paste, even collage medium, you could paint collage medium on and you can emboss it, which we'll talk about that. So textures are really cool because depending on the type of texture paste you use, be that opaque, I'll talk about each one because I did a little swatch. So this one is texture paste opaque, and texture paste opaque is a white opaque paste, okay? Opaque matte paste. So when it goes on the surface, it creates that nice texture, but then when you glaze it, it gives you almost like the ultra thick effect. Does that make sense? So the cool thing about this is because you're putting it on texture, it gives you the illusion of like an ultra thick embossing enamel, but you're using the texture paste as your thickener, if you will. Now, on the paste, you can either use an opaque white or you can also use texture paste translucent. Texture paste translucent, well, it's translucent. You can't see through it. It's not as thick as the opaque. So that kind of gets me right in between. If you're like, well, that's just a little too thick for me. This one is nice because it's that in between. It's not as thin as just right on the paper because there is some texture. You can see that translucent. But it does give you a really nice, very fluid, almost resin-like effect with embossing glaze. So that's translucent texture paste. Would I put it on black? No, because the glaze are translucent. But could you use regular embossing powder over black? Sure you could, because it's going to be opaque. But it wouldn't matter that you had black because you're covering it up. The next one is grit. Grit paste is very gritty, very chunky, okay? So because it's chunky, that means our glaze is going to be chunky. Isn't that cool? because the glaze becomes fluid. So it is only going to highlight that texture. So if you compare it to the matte, which has some, because that kind of picks up your palette strokes or brush strokes. So it has whatever texture you give it, but not this lumpy, bumpy, nuggety that grit paste has. Now, grit paste also comes translucent, so the same rules apply. It's going to be nuggety, but not as gravelly, if you will. So this is, if you don't want it to be as chunky, but you want it to have a little bit of texture, translucent, one of my favorites. Translucent grit paste is, in my opinion, it's my favorite one to use. I'll show you, I think I have one. Yeah, because I have a lot of samples of when I use. So this is done with translucent grit paste and embossing glaze. We could talk about that, but isn't that cool? I mean, it just looks like, fused glass on the surface. There's another one. That cool? So see, it's got texture, but it's translucent, so we can actually see through it, because if you did white grit paste, the opaque one, on a background, you're not going to see the background. This one, I can still see my inky background because I did translucent paste, see-through, with the glaze, also see-through. And so it just highlights my background. It's amazing. All right, then of course Crackle. We can use Crackle. I learned this from Stacy Hutchinson. She was the first one I ever saw use glaze on Crackle paste, which was so cool. So when you apply it. Now every time you apply for all of these, here's the same technique rule. And I can do one real quick. You apply the paste. While the paste is wet, you apply the glaze, which is the powder, and then you let it dry, meaning you have to let your medium dry with the powdered glaze on top. Then once it's dry, say about 15 minutes, then heat emboss. Because if you heat emboss on a wet medium, the medium will just bubble and blister and it will be a hot mess, okay? So the cool thing about Crackle is, look, even our glaze is crackled. It looks like ceramic. Here's one, there's several. Like, look at how cool that is. Can you guys see that? Look at that glaze, just that crackled. It's beautiful. I just love the effect of it because you could do so many. Here's another one with Crackle. So it just looks like some type of ceramic over the top, and that's going to be opaque. Translucent Crackle, it's okay. I mean, it's great for what it is, because this is great for like adding ice or anything over like even a photograph. But for glaze, it still crackles, but I think because it's translucent, it's just not as visually appealing as the opaque. That's just my opinion. But both of them can glaze and both of them will crack. Okay?
Can you say what tin that is?
Oh, this is the Distress ink tin. This is the same tin as the ink pads. I just took out the insert and then it fits 8 jars of medium.
Thanks.
I mean, there's obviously a gap, so you can't just go all Tumbleina on yourself and throw it around. But you can do that. I like the gap because I can throw my palette knives in there. I use these squeegees for paste because they kind of have a flexible rubber. So if I'm doing that, I can just use that rubber edge to drag paste or ink, because I'm not a fan of dragging just plastic through it. So just whatever stuff you want in here. And typically I just keep my swatches in there too. So there you go. So you're welcome. So yes, you can do the Crackle, the grit, the regular paste, the glue, any of those things. You just use it, and you need to try it. You need to play, because you don't know what you're going to discover and what you miss without playing. So let's do one of these. Let's do one of these little painting with powders with Crackle. Okay. I think for this one, I'll do something small. I like doing florals because florals they look really pretty. Here's the mini, I think there's a mini version of that. So I'll take that. Just going to do a little section. Okay. And you can have all your gear out, but this again is just an Asked and Answered for glaze. So I would normally have a grip mat and tape and all that. We're not going there yet. Okay. So let's just take some colors. So depending on, this is like paint residue on my stencil. That's the reality right there. People, it just is what it is. I'm going to do some green for the leaves. I'll do a little pink, and I think in addition to pink, I probably want a little saltwater taffy glaze. That's a nice color. For the center, maybe I want some yellow. So we'll go there. And it's going to be kind of like the feather, but this one I will tend to use my fingers because I like a little bit more control when I'm actually doing an image. So that's just going to be my preference. I'll do that, and maybe I'll even do a little bit of blue. Okay, I got the squeegees off of Amazon. They're for window tinting, car detailing, that sort of jazz. Okay, so I'm going to, and I think they came in like a 6-pack or 3-pack. Just look up like, I don't know, window tinting squeegee or something. I bought them a while ago. Crackle paste opaque, that's what I'm going for. So got my Crackle paste, take off your rubber band, keep it wet. Just for those of you that have been following along and tuning in, because I've been doing the test. August, texture paste, Arizona, totally fluffy. No way, with that much air in that jar, never, not without that. So it's worked for me. I don't know for those of you who have tried it, if you've done any little tests. I wanted to test it because I was like, well, how much longer? Okay, just get that out of the way. People are like, what are you talking about, rubber bands now? Okay. So we're going to take the Crackle paste, pick some up with the palette knife, nice and creamy, almost like frosting. Okay, I'm just going to work over here. And again, this is demo purposes only. So, you know, you're like, why don't you tape your stencil? You do whatever works for you on stencils, but in this case, I'm just going to apply some in random areas. I want to make sure that I have enough Crackle paste on there, but I also want to see my design. If I can't see my design, it's too much paste. Okay, so I'm just going to scrape that off of the knife, put the lid on the jar. It's all about the dismount, so just lift it off. That goes in the water, that goes in water, and it's clean. I'm going to hand that off to Mario.
Got it.
Thanks, Mario.
You're welcome.
Just put it in water so it has a chance to just dissolve off that, or you can go clean your stencil. But what you want to do is, while this paste is wet, we need to get the glaze on. That's our moisture for this. So I'm just going to take the colors. I like to hold the jar in my hand so I can turn it just to get my fingers in there. I'm going to take a pinch of powder and I'm going to twist my fingers together. And by twisting them together, it's putting just the smallest amount of color on there. You'll see in a minute where we go. We can put any of it back. That's still in our fingers, but I need to tip it in the jar so I can get my fingers. If you want to do the whole spoon thing, fine, but you know what we did with the feather. It just applies a lot more. So I don't think you have as much control of color, but if you don't care, do it. All right, so for the center of the flower, I'm going to do just a little bit of yellow. So I'm going to get really close so I can try to get right in the center of those flowers where I want that yellow to be. If you want to do any kind of blend, like a color kind of fading out to, or a flower fading out a little bit, like maybe this bottom one that has a little bit of blue, you can sprinkle that in. You don't have to. I'm using colors just so you know, like there's no right or wrong. Just do your thing. Okay, here's some leaves. And I'm not really paying that much attention. I just know that I want some different colors. So like even for green, could you just use one? Of course. But if you can use a couple of them, even better. So now I'm just going to twist, and now I'm going to fill in kind of more of the stem area. You just want to be sure that if you're doing this, just don't dump everything on top of everything yet, because we haven't spread it out. Okay, so this is what we have. I'll hold it close so you can see that there's really not, we didn't cover everything at this point. This is where the tap comes in. I like to tap right on the paper, but for the sake of the live, I'm going to hold it up. I mean, it's going to get powder everywhere, but typically do this right above the paper. But I want you to watch the colors and what they do. So I'm just going to start tapping and see how that color just immediately like focused. That's what you want to do. You don't want to dump it, because let's say you had a pile of green and the pink didn't distribute yet, the green would go into that area. Does that make sense? I hope so. Okay, a little tappity tap. See, it just comes into focus. And once it comes into focus, then just get rid of the rest. And that is what we have right now. I did how I would totally do flowers, and then I just threw some in just for fun, because why not? It could look like a little cotton candy. Now, let it dry. If you heat it right now, and not just Crackle paste, any paste, if you heat it while the paste is wet, that paste is going to bubble and blister and break through the glaze and look like stepped in chewing gum. Okay, so that's why I prefer to let it dry. The cool thing about this technique is you can let it dry as long as you want. So I would say on Crackle, let it dry until you see that it's crackled, because it will crackle in the powder. If let's say you let it dry overnight, you could come back the next day and still heat emboss it, as long as you don't touch it. Meaning, just because that powder is grabbed onto the paste, if you rub it, it will rub it off. So you just need to not touch it until you heat emboss it. For this, we'll set it aside and we'll see by the end of this. If it's crackled, I'll heat emboss it. And heck, even if it's not, I'll still do it. So then you know what not to do. All right, I got rid of the party mix. I'm gonna put the lids on real quick and we'll see what we're doing. Okay, let's go. The dark background done afterwards. Yes, because it's translucent. So if we did this on brown, these colors would not be light because it's translucent. So once this is done, if we got time to do it, we'll definitely go in and do the inking. So it's really, really important that you just kind of work on lighter areas, because the cool thing about embossing, it's plastic. So that means all that brown ink and everything I put on the top, this is now a resist. It's not going to let that brown, it'll let it go into the cracks, which really makes it cool. But if you were to do this brown first, then you're back to this effect, right? So same powder, but this is the glaze on brown. This is the glaze on white. See? So start on a white surface and then do your inking. Really cool, really fun. I think the most important thing I can encourage all of you, I love that you guys have questions. It's so important that you get your questions answered. But at the same time, you need to try things. You know, if you have it and you're wondering what if, do it. You're not going to ruin things. You're going to actually build that self-confidence of like, hey, I can do this. I can figure it out. So let's talk about this one. This is really cool. I love keeping, I don't keep a lot of stuff, but there's certain backgrounds that I'll be honest, that I'll even do during a demo. And I'm like, dang, that turned out better than I thought, which was surprising. So I'll talk about Spritz because I tried that last night. But this one really fascinated me. I did this at Christmas and it was so like, wow, that's really cool. Okay. So can I do water and glaze? Sure I can. Let's do it on this one. Hey Mario, can you grab me salvage patina distress crayon, please?
Sure.
Thank you. Okay, so for this one, I saw a question of like, can you show, let's do like, what would be good? Peacock feathers would also show, so would salvage patina. But let's just talk about embossing with water. Let's say we wanted this to be grungier, okay? But grungier and maybe grungy and wet, okay? It could be a color, so it could be something like walnut stain, or it could be something bright like peacock feathers, or it could be something kind of in between, like maybe you want to do speckled egg, weathered wood. There's so many options when it comes to glaze. I think for this, let's do Mermaid Lagoon. We talked about that at the beginning. It's a little bright. So embossing with water. When you're doing, what about clear embossing powder over ink or paint? I demoed that at the beginning for ink. So definitely you could use it over ink and paint, anything that's wet. Okay, thank you, Mario.
You're welcome.
So for water, you can actually put water through a stencil. You could even stamp with water, but water is going to be the most finicky when it comes to embossing because water evaporates pretty quick, right? So for this one, I'm just going to splatter on some water. I'm just going to use a sprayer just to create like some droplets of water. Okay, it's on there. And then as quick as I can, I'm going to get the glaze on there. But not only do you have to get the glaze on, so see all that glaze, that's just from my water. You also, when you're embossing with water, you also have to heat emboss it right away. So unlike the other, like when I talked about texture paste where I said, oh, you can come back tomorrow, because texture paste is technically adhering this powder. The water has no adhesive properties. What we're focusing on is really just moisture, right? So that's why if this is wet, we need to try to heat emboss it, because the longer this stays and as the water dries, that's when your embossing powder will just start flying everywhere. Heating underneath, that of course helps you if you're kind of running out of time. That's not that bad. I mean, you saw what I did as far as time. And you could remove any of this. So if you didn't want all that there, you could remove some of it just with a dry paintbrush because, well, we don't have to worry about it. There's nothing underneath it. There we go. The other thing to know about embossing, and this is going to sound weird after what I just said. Remember I was like, oh, water dries so fast. It actually takes the longest to emboss because the powder won't melt until the water underneath it is evaporated. And why the powder doesn't go flying off, I have no idea. It's just one of those weird things. So you just have to heat it. I mean, because you saw when I was embossing everything else, it was pretty quick, and this one is like, dang, he's doing this a long time. It's because you have to wait for that water to dry before that glaze melts. But once it's done, you have a really cool effect. So anything that you have, I mean, really, it could be water. I've seen Louisa emboss with micro glaze. It could be resist spray. So if you like the fact that this is shiny, you could spray resist, and while the resist spray is wet, apply the powder, and that's going to give you like a thicker tinted resist, if you will. So there's a lot of things that you can play with. It's just everything has its own timeline. Gina K in the house. Wow. She's amazing. So anything that you want to do. So what's really fun about this, if you're not into the splatter, is just do it through a stencil. If you want something prettier, find a nice stencil with an open design. And if you have a water mister instead of a sprayer, mist the water and put it on there. And it's nice. The question is, I'm not sure why I would do that. Because I have to do all those things and like be really quick and really fast, when I could put down a stencil, do embossing ink, and have way more time and control to get exactly the same effect, right? The difference here is if we want the splatter effect, that's why I would use water, because that's what I'm getting. Does that make sense? I hope so. Okay, so let's jump back to this one. This one's really cool. It's just, again, another thing about glaze. Glazing on things is just really pretty because it gives you just, I think, the effect of color, of tint on things. That's just what I love about it. So using it on top of things, even if it's just a stamped image on an ink background is going to completely change its color depending on what color glaze you use. So for this one's actually really simple. It's starting with craft. It's using salvage patina glaze. That's going to be our glaze color. And it's using salvage patina crayon. Now you can do other colors. Would you mind grabbing me tumbled glass as well in the crayon, please? Thanks, Mario. Because it doesn't have to be salvage patina. That's why I asked Mario to get me tumbled glass. It could be either one or a combination of them. And we're going to transform craft paper, because they're both craft, into something that looks like just really old, cool, yummy metal, I think. I think the idea is just really, really cool. Okay. Thank you so much. Sure. You guys ready? Okay. Just making sure, like, I don't want to get so into new techniques if I'm not answering questions. So I'm trying to do both. Okay, looks like I got time. Okay, here we go. So we're going to take a dabber because I want to go over the whole thing. And we want to add kind of the look and feel, if you will, of I think kind of what we're going for here. Does that make sense? I hope it makes sense to you guys. Okay. So there's two different looks that we can go for. If we want it just to be really kind of light and creamy and more ethereal, you can just work directly on your embossed piece of paper. But if you want a little bit more definition, here's a thing to point out. I'm going to take an ink pad. Now I'm going to use black, but it doesn't have to be black. Okay, don't think that it has to be. I live in the world of grunge. I'm happy there, and I don't apologize for it. If you want to keep it simple, do this. If you want to have a little bit more grunge definition, you're going to go back to your folder and ink, and I'm going to take my machine. You never know where this is going to go. It's good. Okay, just going to open a machine real quick. I'm going to take, because I'm going to need to emboss this. Okay, look at this, crazy. See, Mario's already at the ready. He's like, oh boy, when you bring out the big guns, it's going to be tough. Okay, here's what we're going to do. We're going to take a pre-embossed design. This happens to be on craft. We're going to take a permanent ink pad. You could also do this with oxide, but because I'm doing glaze, I'm going with permanent. I'm going to take archival. And all I'm going to do is I'm just going to start swiping this on my folder, on the part where the design is carved in, the innie, not the outie. And I'm using my ink kind of like brush strokes. See how you could cover the whole thing if you were going like blackout technique, but I'm not. I want it to be a little bit more paintier. Okay, so I've got my archival ink. I'm going to put this back in the folder, kind of lock it in where it locks in. I'm going to close this, and I'm going to run it through the machine again to emboss it. So I've already embossed it. Let's see what we got. Thanks, Mario. It might grab it. It's a tiny one. Oh, yeah. See, easy peasy. It's not like those big ones, huh? And I'm just going to run it through. And what this is going to do is it's just going to deboss the details. So see, you just get more detail in there, and it's also going to add some kind of black marks to the back. This you could just clean with stamp cleaner, hand sanitizer, rubbing alcohol, or you can do water if you're quick. Okay, but that's just, to me, that's just going to bring a little bit more definition into my design. Can I hand you that? Thank you so much. Okay, so that's what I did here to kind of get this black skippity bit. Okay, so now that that's done, now we're going to go in and do the glazing crayon. Really, really simple. I'm going to take this, I'm going to take that dabber, just going to get it ready. So by dabbing it on the glass also, it means if I need more, I can often swipe it up off the glass, kind of scoop it and just go for it. Okay, so I'm just going to take my dabber and I'm going to swipe across this in different directions. I'm not applying a ton of pressure. I'm just, you can kind of feel when the dabber has hit the surface. Now, could you cover it from edge to edge? You do you. But again, I want this to be a little bit more kind of abstract. But I also want to make sure that I'm getting glaze into all of those little detailed areas, or any kind of embossing. So that's what's really nice about the dabber as well, is it does allow me to kind of focus on those places. Okay, so that's why I did archival. If you would have done oxide, by the time you do the dabber, you would have that ink smeared everywhere. But the permanent ink, well, it's permanent. So next I'm just going to cover it with glaze, pick it up, tappity tap. Okay. Now, if you want to remove some powder, because see, I love this. See that little edge? Ooh, that's my jam. I love that. So if you want to remove powder, you have several options. And this is just good to know just for general embossing. So typically if you were embossing, let's say you were doing a sentiment, you know, and you get that little fleck of powder that's not where it's supposed to be. It's kind of out there and you're trying to take it off. Often people will go in with a paintbrush. Okay, a paintbrush is going to, that'll do the trick. My favorite tools though, these are from Dina Wakley. They're shaping tools. They're little silicone tipped tools. These are phenomenal because let's say I had powder where I didn't want it. This is how precise this little tool is. You can literally take off exactly what you want. Okay. So unlike a brush, you know, where sometimes you go to brush it off, but it actually flicks it somewhere else. These, it just picks it right up. And this has two different tips. And then she also has the chisel one. So, and it's silicone, so the powder just rubs right off. It doesn't do anything to it. But, you know, even if you wanted to like clean up an edge, like a straight edge, this is really nice because, like, look at that. I mean, you can actually use it like a squeegee. Pretty wild. So that's what I use on cards if I'm ever embossing where I don't want it, because it's almost like a magnet. It just takes it right off. Okay. But this, I just want a little skippity edge, so that's why I'm just using a paintbrush, and then I'm going to go in and use my fingers, just because I want my edge to be a little bit, well, a little grungier. Okay, and maybe I want some in that little area. Okay, so that's what we have. We're going to go in and emboss it in just a second. So let me put this powder back. Okay. There we go. Shakety shake. Put the lid on. Off we go. All right. So let's find little hot hands. There you go. Oh, perfect. Let's heat emboss. Okay. So as we're heat embossing, again, kind of start, but just keep it in a circle. Because see, once you see it melt, see in the middle, if you just keep going, the race is on. All right. So what I love about this particular glaze, and you could try this with other colors. I'm not saying you have to use salvage patina. You can do this with tattered rose or any kind of pinks, and you don't have to do the black step. That's what I said. I knew I wanted mine grungy. If you're like, that is already a hot mess, then do this on white. You don't have to do it on craft. But this is about doing glaze and crayons. It's kind of like a different spin. Oh, there's a little bit right there. There we go. Oh, right under the hot hands. There we go. The cool thing about this is that it's just going to give that paper a whole different, I don't know, look, dynamic. And that's why I wanted some of that paper to be revealed. So if you didn't have the black down there, it would be just clean craft paper and you could go in and do your grunging on any of these other areas. But because the glaze is on top, I can't get to that paper anymore underneath. I can only put stuff on the top, okay? So what I'm going to do to kind of create a cool effect, oh, Alan, these tools are no longer, these make me sad. Alan's here from Ranger. These are no longer available. So if you look for, I don't know what they would be called in the regular world, but they're just like a silicone tipped tool. They use it in mixed media. I think they even use it maybe in polymer clay, but you want something like this. I mean, they're very cool. So sorry, I didn't want to lead you guys astray, but thanks for telling me, Alan. Okay, this way everyone's not looking later. So now I'm going to take crayons, and that's what's going to give this effect. It's all about using not only what you have, but use your products together. Don't be afraid to like put this and glaze, and like you wouldn't think to throw all these things in the mix, but that's why we have them. We have these tools to use them. So I'm going to do a little tumbled glass off to the side. You can see already that's a pretty bright color. So I don't really use it as much. I definitely prefer more of this patina, and you can see I'm carefully applying that color, right? So important. Just scribble it on, doesn't really matter. Crayons are a water reactive pigment. So I'm going to use a little bit of water just on the glass, just because I want to make sure I have a little bit of moisture in my finger, not tons, but it's going to help me move this color a lot easier. Okay? And while you're doing this, just be aware of your fingers on the side doing nothing but doing a dance. I don't know, mine likes to just do a little can off to the side. I don't know why that bonus finger feels like it needs to move. So now I'm very mindful to just ground it every time. Like, you're grounded. I don't know why. I've watched other videos and I'm like, what am I doing? I'm doing like a line dance with my finger. Okay, so once that color's on there, if I want to pick up some of this, water reactive. So just by adding some water to it, it's just going to allow me to put on some of that like lighter blue, almost like a finger paint. And that's just putting around the edge. And I'm going really around where it's embossed. I'm not so much going into the other areas, but water is so helpful when you're using crayons, especially this way, because if you don't, there's a lot of friction. It's a lot to try to get this pigment to move. Okay, so right now we've just kind of smeared it around. Now we've got to do the reveal. So this is where we've added the crayon, and it's on there. You can feel it's a little tacky. The crayon will dry totally smooth because it's not waxy. They're incredibly cool. But I'm going to spray some water just on a paper towel. One, that's going to clean my finger. Two, that's going to clean this right off the glass, because water just takes these off completely. But I want just a damp paper towel to help with removing some of this color. A baby wipe is really, really wet. Now you can definitely do this with your fingers, but you can also just take that damp paper towel at first and just start dabbing off some of that color. You can go in and move some of that, kind of blend it around, because too much water and then you've essentially just washed off everything that you did. So that's why I work with a paper towel, because sometimes I'll want a lot of that color revealed and sometimes I'll want some of that color kind of moved around. And I go back with my fingers and just kind of move it around some. If I see an opportunity to just add a little bit of color, I do. And that's what you get. You get just a beautiful patina looking piece. And you could go in and ink it. If you didn't want that much color there, you can keep moving this color. I mean, if you didn't want there at all, like you could wipe it all off, because the glaze is what's created the barrier. But the glaze and crayons, it's a match made in creative heaven. It's just cool, isn't it? So a wonderful, wonderful look and feel when you're creating patinaed papers. This one doesn't have as much black as this, but I love it. It's cool. All right. How are we doing? Are the crayons permanent? They're not permanent in a sense of being waterproof because they're water-based, but they won't come off just by the touch. So there you go. Okay. Let's keep going with glaze. Have I missed any questions, Mario, as I was enthralled in that? Okay, because I'll just keep going and talk about other things we can do with glaze, which is pretty fun. I'll get into metals probably at the end in a second, but I want to talk about distressed spritz for a second, because that was one of those things, and I'm going to admit, I was done prepping, but this was like a late at night last night idea when we were done, and we were watching TV, and I just get up and come in the studio. Mario's like, what are you doing? Are you not, did you forget something? I'm like, I have this idea in my head, and if I don't figure it out, forget it. So I wanted to see how glaze would work with distressed spritz, because I didn't think it would really work. but I was surprised at the result. So I can't really tell you, did it work or did it not? I'll leave that up to you. Okay. And this is not all about Distress Spritz. We'll have to do another Asked and Answered about that. But Distress Spritz is a mica spray that when you apply it over, it gives you that wonderful shimmer. And I was like, gosh, wouldn't it be cool? Like, what happens if I put glaze on it? Would I still see the shimmer through the glaze because the glaze is translucent? The answer was no, okay? So what I did on this one is I went in and I put, because this already had texture paste and everything, and they were like 2 halves, okay? So I'm like, okay, let me put this on. So I placed it down, I put embossing ink down, I did my glaze, and I embossed it, and it embossed. It glazed all these dots, like the other samples that I showed you, but the spritz was nowhere to be found. And I was like, dang. And then I'm like, huh. So I wonder what would happen then if I put spritz over the embossed glaze. So it was already heat embossed. I spritzed in the same colors again, and then reheated the glaze. Could I trap that spritz in the glaze? And that's exactly what I did. So all of these colors on top that look like, almost like the camera is not doing it justice. It kind of looks like dichroic glass. Like it fused that spritz in the glaze. It's like suspended in there. So now when you see it in the paper, it's also inside the glaze. Pretty wild. If you didn't reheat it, the spritz would wipe right off, because spritz is for porous surfaces. So if you would have spritzed it on the plastic, you're like, ooh, it's cool. You need something that's going to grab onto it. You know, anything with a tooth that would have it. But spritz would just be plastic. I mean, the glaze would just be plastic. But remelting it in there, it was wild. So that's what I'm saying. Like, you tell me, did it work? I mean, it didn't work the way I hoped it would work, but it actually hoped in the way that I never imagined, and I love it even more. Because now I've got a spritzed, glazed background and this started out exactly the same background. So see the transformation that glaze and spritz made? Wow. Sweet mother of mica. That's just like, look at that. That mica shimmer. Holy moly. Anyway, that was just one thing I wanted to share. It was pretty cool. So I was like, yes, it worked. And I was able to just go back about my business, because would I explore it 100 other different ways? Yes, I would. But I'm one of those, I'm a 5-year-old. If I want to get an answer to the question, I want it now. And I wouldn't be able to sleep if I didn't do it. So I love it. Okay, cool. Let's get into metals. I think so far so good. All right. Let's get into metals, because metals are really fascinating. It's one of those things that it works so beautifully. And I love that about embossing glaze, because all the different colors of embossing glaze, this is why I said, you know, am I happy with 48 colors? Absolutely. And if Ranger didn't want to do any more, I would be fine. I don't think like, oh, boo, I'm missing out. But in the world of distress, I'm in love with the palette of 72. So are there colors that I would love to have someday? Absolutely. And that really just goes to how these continue to sell or not. And I think that's important in any creative industry. So what's cool about any kind of metal or resin, anything that can handle heat can be glazed. Keep that in mind. So if you start thinking, will it work on this? Will it work on this? Will it work on this? I'm going to let you answer that question, because the answer is, can you heat it? If you can heat emboss it, the answer would be, yes, it would work on that. Okay? So if you watch the Valentine demo, you know that we did salvaged hearts. These would be ideology resin pieces with embossing glaze. And we used distressed crayon on this. So you can go back and watch that Valentine live, but it creates a really cool kind of chippy enameled look to something resin, because these are resin and these are heat stable. Okay, so there you go. Yep, if you can heat it, you can glaze it. You know it. So these were ideology. These are heirloom roses. These are actually retired, but I know Paula used them recently in a Valentine make, and I know that there are retailers that still have some left. I know Advantis has a little stock left, but when you glaze them, like, I'll be honest, this was never really my favorite embellishment product, just because, you know, you had to alcohol ink them, and it was okay if you alcohol inked them. They never looked vintage that way. But these, check these out. These are beautiful little vintage florals, and these are the heirloom roses. It's no different. It's just using what I'm going to tell you. That's how I did this. It's embossing glaze and a crayon, same way we did the hearts. But look at these flowers, and they actually look like porcelain. So putting it on a card or putting on an embellishment, it's like, now I'll be placing an order on Monday for more of these, even though they're discontinued, because I know they're still stock. They're very cool. But then we get into metals. And so before I get into metals, because I am going to demo the metals, I want to talk about that. Oh, does Simon have them? Yeah. I just saw that. Ooh, well, that's where I'll be placing my order then. There we go. Yeah, I was just going to Google and see what happened. Thanks, Simon. Collage medium. Collage medium is going to be our moisture, if you will. If you've been watching from the beginning, you know we've talked about water, we've talked about ink, we've talked about all the things. I'm using collage medium to adhere the powder. And here's why. Because collage medium works on these substrates. Collage medium is what would glue this embellishment to anything. So if I wanted to glue a butterfly onto a box, or if I wanted to add something to glass, or if I wanted to add paper to this, collage medium is my adhesive. So I know it's going to stick to this. So that's why if you start saying, well, will Mod Podge work? Will this glue work? Will this... I would say that you could use any glue that would stick to what you're putting it on. Does that make sense? Because sometimes when people try to emboss things like metal, or even with salvage hearts, because after the Valentine demo, we did get some emails going, hey, you know, I'm trying this technique, it's not working, the glaze is just scratching off. And of course I replied, I'm like, oh, are you using your embossing ink? And they're like, yes, I absolutely am. And I'm like, well, that's your problem, because embossing ink never dries. Embossing ink can't go on plastic or metal because it's glycerin. And the glycerin, if it doesn't absorb into paper like it does when we use it, it's going to always be slippery and flake off. So that's why I think, like in that Vellum question at the beginning, too much of that glycerin is just going to make that stuff chip away. So by using embossing ink, it'll heat emboss beautifully. You're going to think, hey, I figured it out. And then as soon as it's done and you touch it, it slides right off, because that barrier of glycerin is keeping this powder from attaching to the surface. So collage medium solves all that. We're essentially gluing the powder on, and then we heat emboss it. And by doing that, we're able to transform so many ordinary things, like these charms, into extraordinary things, like beautifully glazed metals. I mean, it looks like it's been fused in glass, because we can see through it. You see all that metal shine, but it's just glaze. So if you're looking, you know, if you've got this lucky adornment and you're thinking you want to do stuff for St. Patrick's Day, I mean, could you paint them? Yes. Could you alcohol ink them? Yes. You still can alter all these all the different ways, but look at how beautiful they are when you glaze them. They just take on a whole different property, and even down to the little details. This is where that pen came in handy. I'm not really good with the detail stuff. You guys know me. I'm a little too careless, but I did pretty good. So I took, like, these were the adornment hearts. Using the little embossing pen, I was like, okay, I got it. And guess what? It chipped off because embossing ink didn't work. And I did this last week when I was like, oh, I've got this done. And then I picked it up and it chipped off. I'm like, why did it come off? And I'm like, oh, because my brain was like, ooh, that's really easy. I'll just use the pen. Didn't work. So what did I do? I took a tiny little paintbrush, some collage medium, painted a little collage medium, and glazed it. So see, even doing it, I still forget the obvious sometimes because I'm so focused on, ooh, that worked, knowing it wouldn't work. Okay? Check these out. If you're into bugs or butterflies, I mean, come on. Come on. Look at these. These are just, and you don't have to do the whole part. So like on this butterfly, I didn't do the body because I still wanted it to have that wonderful silver. I just did the wings. And these are mixtures of glaze. So when you see these wings of the butterfly, and I'll demo this, I'll demo how we do the metal, but that was me sprinkling a little picked raspberry and then going in with kitsch flamingo and a little bit of tattered rose, just so when it melts, I'm getting all of those different blends of pinks, not just solid. Really beautiful, isn't it? This one's fun. You can see I did a little kind of monarch look where I did some little wild honey, a little spice marmalade, but then I wanted some brown, so I did a little scorched timber on the edge. Cool, but I left the body alone. Could you have done the whole thing? Yes. But I think it's way more fascinating, like these insects from entomology, way more fascinating that you just leave part of it alone. So this is where we're going to talk about layering the glaze. Because it's translucent, the more you apply, the more intense the color becomes. Okay? Keep that in mind. So if you're doing anything and you don't like the color, you don't like the intensity of the color, you have options. Could we have painted these first? Yes. Could you have maybe even tried a little crayon? You could have tried, but then the crayon would stick to the metal until you use collage medium, and then that would wipe off the crayon. So paint would have been a base color, but it wouldn't give you the metallic shine underneath the glaze. That's why for me, when I do metals, I'm a glaze purist. Whatever color I want to achieve, it will be done with glaze. Because I think that's what's always going to give me that. I saw someone say it's like cloisonne. It's just going to give you that really true metallic shine underneath the glaze. Paint would take that all away. Okay, so how do we do it? It's really just like how we did the heart, but I'm going to talk about layering. So tools you need some sort of stick or something that you can put some heat stable tape. This is red line tape. This tape is meant to be embossed, so you can use heat on it. You can try other adhesives. You can try things like score tape and all that, but typically when you emboss it, especially on metal, it's going to fall off. I used to try to do this with hot glue, but then the metal got so hot, it would remelt the hot glue and it would fall off. So red line tape is my go-to to use it. Then I put something, you want it heat stable, so a popsicle stick is going to be good. I can handle these because they're nice and smoothie. They are. So let's just take out a butterfly. Why not? Mario's laughing. I do. See, I've got so many issues, guys. No idea. It's crazy. But it's the truth. Let's just do a butterfly. Because once you see it, it's the same as all the other ones. Just move this off to the side. Okay. So what we're going to do is we've applied a piece of tape to the end of the stick. We're going to take a pick or whatever. Going to peel off the liner. You're going to take your charm and you're going to stick it onto the tape. Just give it a good push. So depending on your charm, like these happen to have a little curve, you obviously want to push the area that's going to have surface contact to it. Okay? Then we're going to use collage medium. My band is already off. And a brush. What did I do? There it goes. We'll use a little brush. And then we're going to do colors. So let's say we want to do that little pinkety one again. Why not? Let's do those colors, just so you can see kind of how something is done. It's really fun. Okay, gonna have a little paper. To me, glazes are like a whole, it's hard to describe because I mean, I've been doing this for so long and I get it. Like I have embossing powders that I have when I first started that I've used them, but it's like, it's the never ending thing. And then you think, do I really need more embossing powders? But when you understand glaze, it's like a completely different creative medium because it could be used with your stamps, it could be used with your die cuts, it could be used on your embellishments, it could be used with embossing folders and backgrounds. It's as if it was a different type of like ink pad or paint. It's a glaze, but it's just in powdered form. So instead of having to always be liquid, it gives you way more control. Okay, so here's our little butterfly. We're going to take a brush. Now here's what I do. I'll just pick up some of this collage medium and I'm just going to put that down on the glass because I don't need my jar open. And if you don't want to put it on the glass, you can put it on a craft mat. You can put it on whatever you want. But the point is you just want to put thin layers of collage medium on your metals, especially if it has texture, because if you put too much of this collage medium on and you get like a big goop of it, then the problem is your glaze goops and then it doesn't emboss smooth like the samples I showed you. Okay. So I'm just using a flat brush and I'm just taking my time, really. Collage medium dries pretty quick, but you'll see what I'm doing. So I'm just going to brush some of that on, staying away from the body. Now I can just pick up a little bit more on the glass. So I'm not dipping back in that jar and just getting too much. It's just easier to control. So whether you have a piece of palette paper, whatever, the point is just apply thin layers with your brush. It's kind of hard to do this to the phone, but I might screw up a little bit. That's all right. If you want to go around the edges, go for it. You do whatever you want. So once I get a thin layer, I'm just going to load my brush again just with a thin layer, and I'm going to do one last, just kind of smoothing out, if you will. If I see any chunks of collage medium, I'll smooth it away. But I want to make sure I give everything one quick last coat. Then we go in to the powders. So here I'm just going to do just what I did before, kind of twist my finger, or you can use the spoon. Whatever works. Do a little bit of light color there. And we'll go here, do a little light color there. And I kind of work dark to light. I don't know why I do. I think just because the darker colors, if you have too much of the dark color, it will overtake all the other translucent colors. So then I'll just kind of finish off. So there you go. That's our glaze on the collage medium. And then I'm just going to tap this off. Just kind of tap, again, not flicking, just tapping the stick. And then there's my glaze, okay? So you see where it's on that little body a little bit? Don't freak out that it's there because there's no glue there, but you have to remove it, because if you don't, when the metal gets hot, it will in fact melt to the metal. So, so technically, like if you were working on, well, let's just say you were working on a hot plate, you could actually do this technique if you had, say, a little electric skillet, or you had an old school melting pot. You could do this and skip this step. You could actually place a piece of metal on a hot plate and start putting your powders on. As soon as they touch, they'll melt into the metal. It doesn't give you as much control because once it melts, you can't take it away. But that is an option. So the glue is just doing it us a favor because we're in kind of that dry mode. So I just wanted to clean off the body a little bit. Okay, now we're going to let this dry. Collage medium on metal, gosh, it's only going to take not long at all, just a few minutes. So while that's sitting there, we'll go back and check out our Crackle one and take a look. Woven, glitter, let's see. Oh, I'm just looking for questions. I think you guys are probably more mesmerized than questions. That's that's a good thing, I suppose. That's good. Okay. So collage medium, I'm just going to clean up. Mario, did I miss anything?
Nope.
Okay. I think, yeah, everyone's like, I want to see how this happens. I'm fascinated. So look, we all know, if you've been in this industry and you've seen a demo or been to an event or anything, when we start watching embossing powder melt, it is fascinating every single time. It's still fascinating. Like, I never tire of seeing it. And that's why I'm so passionate about this line of glaze, because the colors and everything are just, so amazing. Okay, let's check this out. Let's see how we're doing here. We're almost there. I still feel the bottom is a little cool, but I can see some crackling happening. So it's almost there. I just want to give it a little bit more time if I can. Let me look at the time. Ooh, well, we're going to wrap this up. Okay. How do you use the band on the jars? On all of my mediums, this is a number 82 rubber band. They don't come with it. It's just something that you can buy them. I know Simon Says has them. Ranger has them. You can even find them on Amazon. They're just a number 82 rubber band, but you have to buy a lot of them. And it just goes around that little seam to keep the air out. It's just something I figured out, well, last year I think it was, because I was trying press and seal, I was trying all sorts of things, and it just was not working. So, does the packaging say glaze? Yes. It's going to say Embossing Glaze. So the only difference is really the label. The new labels, it just has the color in that little band, right? So this was, here we go. Let's just look here. These say Embossing Glaze, but it's so tiny. But yes, if it's distress, like, yes, Embossing Glaze. The label will say it, as well as, well, depending on where you're shopping online as well. What do we got, Mario? What kind of glass plate am I using? This is my Tonic Studio mat. It's a glass mat. This happens to be white. We also do a media mat in black that has a craft sheet. So it just works really well. Okay, I'm going to do the butterfly, because I know the butterfly is probably pretty close to drying, but I'm going to emboss these two things and then we're going to wrap this up. I'll just start with this one. It's going to be good enough. I'll give the butterfly a little bit longer. Okay, this one, remember, was Crackle paste. Let's see what happens. Here we go. Glaze does not come in gold, silver, or copper because metallics are not translucent. Metallic pigments are all opaque. So because it is a translucent line, it does not. Although it would be kind of beautiful if it did. Wouldn't that be nice, a translucent metallic? I'd love that. Okay, we're going to heat emboss this now. So our paste is pretty much dry. You'll see. Well, you'll know if it's not, because if it's not, you're going to start seeing these little snap, crackle pops of white goo. No, it's doing pretty good. Nice. All right, and all I'm doing is it might be weird for the camera, but I need to hold it to where the light outside is catching it, so I know that it's embossed. There we go, because we want that really nice enameled shine. So I'm doing this half. All right, that looks good. I'm going to switch sides, or you can use, what is that, little hands? That's what I really need. There we go. Perfect. So much easier with these, really. Because even the heat coming through the paper. Can you guys see that embossing? This one's a little harder to see melt because it's so fine and beautiful. The little crackly bits. Okay. That's embossed. Okay. So here's what we've got. Look at these. Beautiful. So right now, you don't really notice the crackle as much. That's where the ink is going to come in. We're going to do that little ink right now. I'm going to set this little butterfly aside, that little glaze. Okay, let's see what kind of ink I have. Wouldn't surprise me. Oh, of course, I've got some sludge. What do I got here? All right, we got a little frayed burlap spray, and I want something a little darker as well, so I probably have, oh no, I'll just use an ink pad. I'll use a little bit of a little scorched timber and gathered twigs. So I want to use ink. Ink is going to help me get color into that area a little bit better. So because this is the only spray that I brought over for the demo, which is frayed burlap, which is light, this is also a tip for you guys. Hold on, I want to make sure I don't have any, feels like a little sand on the beach right there. So I just want to clear this off. It's really important to know that, let's say you don't have a lot of colors of spray, but you have ink pads and only some, mix and match. So here I can take my inks, I'm going to throw down a little gathered twigs, I'm going to put down a little scorched timber, see how dark those are, and then I'm just going to mix in frayed burlap. That's going to give me a whole different sludge, and we're going to create a sludgy effect on this. So what I want to do is I'm just going to give it a mist of water, just because I want my colors to move a little bit. Start with some frayed burlap because I want to get that fluid into the cracks, and then just start working into this. You can do all of it with spray. You don't have to push any of it into the mat. It doesn't matter. But here's where things kind of change. I'm switching over heat tools, and you might be like, why are you doing that? Well, because I'm drying ink, and if I use this heat tool, I know that I can dry the ink without remelting the powder. Remember, embossing powder and embossing glaze can always remelt. Always, okay? So if you're using a heat tool, it's going to take that much longer for this to get hot enough and remelt. So, but if you only have an embossing gun, go for it. Just be aware that when you're heating your ink, you're also probably remelting your powder a little bit. So you just want to be a little cautious that you don't overheat. This, I know that my embossing glaze is not going to reliquify. Not with this heat tool in that short amount of time. Okay. Now I'm just going to move some of this with some water. Go in with a little bit more. Do a little splattery there. Just fun. Just kind of get some grunge. And you can, if you want to move some color around like that, touch it. Just use your fingers. Okay. Let's dry this ink too. Okay. Yeah, scorched timber. Oh my gosh. For the win. This color is just, it's glorious. It really is. Final distress color, and honestly my absolute favorite. It just creates a look unlike anything. I use scorched with blues. I use scorched with green because it just creates that charred effect with any color. All right, so I'm drying this. Now I'm just going to add a little water just because I want to create, some of that splattery effect. So that's what I'm doing, just using this. Doing my best to get some splatters there. Okay. And then to create water drops, not only do we add some water, but we're also going to go in with a paper towel and we're going to blot some of that off. Okay, perfect. Now let's just get rid of this ink. A little bit of water. Okay, so here's what we have. A beautiful, crackled, porcelain looking background. But when you look real close, everything is crackled. And obviously the bigger the area, let me bring in, here we go. The bigger the flower, the more you can see, bigger crackle effects. So it really depends, but it will crackle nonetheless. Beautiful, isn't it? So fun to do. I think that's so cool. All right, now we're going to go back to this, go back to our metal. Here's the thing to remember on the metals. Once we start heating this little booger is going to get super hot. So no matter how curious you are, no matter how much you want to just do this and do that, once you start heating this, don't touch it. Don't even touch it to see if it's getting hot because it's going to get that hot, it will zing you instantly. I want to have a piece of paper and some colors of glaze open to show you what I'm going to talk about, which is if you want to layer it. It doesn't mean you have to do this every time. It just is if you want to add layers, and I know I'm going to want to add probably some of these colors, if not all. I don't know. It's going to be super important that you have them at the ready because once you get going, we're relying on the metal staying hot to add the second layer, okay? So I'm just going to start heating this. this is going to take, not a long time, but it's going to take a little longer than paper because we need the metal to get hot. Once the metal gets hot, game on, and you'll see it. So right now, it's just starting on the edges. See that? And I don't need to worry too much. You can't over emboss on metal because metal is non-porous, so the powder can't ever soak in. So see how that's already starting to melt? Okay. All right, so the whole thing is melted. See that? And that's pretty. I think it's nice. It gives you a nice effect, but can you still see all those little dips in the butterfly? Okay, I want to fill those in. So while this is hot, I'm just going to start sprinkling that glaze. And see this glaze melts on contact? So try to avoid the body if you can, because it would stick to the body area as well. If you got on the body area, you could kind of scrape it off. But then as I sprinkle it on, there's a point where it won't melt on contact, which is now. But the powder is actually still stuck to that hot glaze. All we have to do is heat it up. And you'll see it just goes right in, just becomes liquefied to that bottom area. See that? Look at that. So the more you add, the more fluid it gets. And I normally only do it like once like that. I mean, could you do a third and a fourth? And I guess you do as many, but like to me, that's plenty. That is beautiful. And as much as you want to touch this right now to take it off the stick, denied. It will, yeah. It's so hot. It'll make you pee yourself. It's just that, it's that much. I mean, I'll be honest, like I've done it and it just zings you. It shocks everything in your body. Like, don't do it. Oh, but look at how beautiful those colors blend. You see what I mean about the saltwater taffy, the kitsch flamingo, that little bit of picked raspberry? When we put in that second layer, it became so liquid that those colors, it looks like we alcohol inked underneath it. And we didn't. It's just so, so cool. Easy to do. It's just beautiful. And how long does it take to cool? It doesn't take that long. I mean, at this point, if you were in a hurry, my cheat is you can just spray it with water. That'll cool it down. And then you can, it's still going to be warm, but it's enough to, because the water is just going on plastic. The water's not going to do anything. We'll just dry off the water. But yeah, that's how, look at that, done. Damn. Isn't that beautiful? So cool. I just love the effect. So that's really a fun way to use embossing glaze. So there you have it. I really appreciate when it comes to these Asked and Answered that you guys come with questions. I love that you come with questions about the product. We're only 2 in, but I think this series hopefully is really helpful for you. And I can't wait to talk about other products, other brands, because there's so many things really that we can work on. There's a lot of different things. The tape I used was Redline tape. That's what I used. So that's a heat stable tape. It's really cool. I called it baloney tape as well, but Redline tape is the industry name for that product. So there you go. A lot of cool effects with Distress Embossing Glaze. As with anything, if you want to learn more, use it, do it, try it out. If you go to timholtz.com, Mario, if you don't mind throwing that link up again, just go to timholtz.com. We just used the search feature on my website and just typed in glaze, and it brings the page of all of these demos I did back in 2020 and last year. And I mean, there's a lot of education that takes deeper dives into these techniques. This Asked and Answered series is a bit more free-flowing, part demo, part conversation. But I really want you guys to play with the glaze. Oh, thanks, Vicky. Play with them and try different things. I mean, this still, even though we had fun for the last 2 hours playing, this honestly doesn't even scratch the surface of what you can do with glaze and how many different mediums. Once you know the basics, where it's like, it's translucent, I just need something to stick it down. I can put it over layers. I can put it under layers. Oh, if I want to, dull the finish, do steel wool. Oh, if I want to change the color, I can add crayon, because even crayon dulled that. If you saw that patina flower, using distressed crayon dulls it as well. As long as you don't wipe it off, it'll stay dull. So it's just good fun. And that's what I really love about these lives. We've got a busy month, I will just say. Be sure that follow us on Instagram because we're going to announce some lives. We have a lot of lives coming up. I'm just not going to say the dates now just because it'll be confusing, but a lot. So some good fun coming our way. But thank you. Thanks, Mario, for monitoring the chat and the questions and handing me this and handing me that. It's fun. This is like This is like old school at the shows demoing where it's just this creative free-for-all. And that is my happy place. Like, I love it. I can talk about product for days. I could just sit with a group of people for 10 hours and just ask, answer. But I want to keep these as short as possible, and we have hit the 2-hour mark. So hope you guys had fun. Really do. It was great to share these and just remind you, if you have them, what to do with them. And if you don't, get them out, play with them. So with that, enjoy the rest of your Saturday. This guy's like, he's been busy. I've been seeing him like going back and forth and pointing things, and I appreciate that.
A little bit of this, a little bit of that.
Yeah, it's really good. It's quite a bit of fun. And we're 2 in on the Asked and Answered, and I'm glad you guys. I have another series in my head. I'm not going to tell you what it is yet, but I was like, I want to do this, and Mario's like, do it. So
Right.
I love it. He encourages me so much. It's great. So you guys go out there, really have a wonderful rest of your day.
Have a great weekend.
Yeah, go out there and really share some kindness out there. The world needs all the kindness it can get. So when you're out there, if you don't have anything nice to say, find something nice to say. Just take 2 seconds to, if you're on Instagram, just, you haven't left a comment for that person in forever, just say, hey, love it, very cool, have a good weekend, whatever. I think it makes us all just a better people that way. So with that, enjoy the rest of your weekend.
See you guys.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.